From the New Arts and Media Studios in Milwaukee, I'm Charles Bursell. This is The Log. I want to follow up on something we talked about yesterday. The quote that we talked about, the meme, "No one is going to give you the education you need to overthrow them." And I extended that beyond education into media generally, and what is put in front of our eyes and ears virtually 24/7. Every streaming service, every social media site, every television show, every movie, anything, all media is not going to give you what you need to overthrow them. So we talked about that. I promised I would follow up with the author of that quote, because the meme is it's Linus, the Peanuts character, speaking to his classmate, and it looks every bit like an original Charles Schulz cartoon, including the printing. It looks like his handwriting. So you'd think it's Charles Schulz. No, it's a quote from the Black liberation activist Assata Shakur. So this took me down a couple of different rabbit holes today that I want to explore. But first, let me just put a button on yesterday's conversation. I just really feel compelled to send out this warning that we are being propagandized, we're being gaslighted, we're being manipulated every minute. Every minute you're on media, and corporate media, and that's pretty much everything. You have to make the effort to seek out non-corporate and anti-corporate messages. Now, that's one of the beauties of social media. With all of its criticism, you can still find on Facebook, on Twitter, on Reddit, on other sites, you can find actual subversive, dissident thought. You can still find it in social media. That's not to say it's going to be there forever. And it's not to say that it's easy to find. It's certainly not to say that it's the dominant message. No, it's still absolutely dominated by corporate messages. And after giving it a little more thought after yesterday's program, something else I feel it needs to be emphasized. If you, like I, think you're a sophisticated consumer of media, we all think that. And maybe you are. You probably are. But it's just worth a reminder that if you're spending any time with media, and again, I'm using this in the broadest sense of the word, anything online, any movies you watch, any television you watch, any streaming service, 99 times out of 100, what is put in front of you has been literally, quite literally, I'm not speaking figuratively here, it's been approved for your viewing. It's been approved for your reading by a corporate entity, by a gatekeeper. And it's just important that we remind ourselves of that. Because I'm not asking you to completely shut the whole thing down. There's great information to be had out there. And if you're savvy about it, if you're aware of what you're seeing, you should be able to navigate this. Some really great sort of program about nature or any one of hundreds of subjects. You can still find good information. But when it comes to the very foundations of the rules of the road, money, politics, the way the world works, that's where you have to be aware of the constant gaslighting. Even in the most innocent presentations, some sitcom, some innocuous, funny insurance commercial, you have to know that every message has been approved. And when it comes to the fundamentals of our society, about how it works, and especially the role of money, and attitudes about capitalism versus socialism versus anarchism, all of that, you are watching corporate-approved programming. You have to know it. And one of the major points I was trying to make yesterday, that it's especially insidious when the program is presented as some sort of subversive or dissident or alternative view. That's why I mentioned Charlemagne the God. Oh, he'll say anything. What a truth teller. That's when it's the most insidious. When so-called liberals or progressives or however you want to label yourself, you're watching The God's Honest Truth, or you're watching The Daily Show. You're watching so-called progressives rip into conservatives. You're watching, and what started this whole conversation yesterday, you're watching the new Netflix movie, Don't Look Up. Oh, this anti-corporate message, this pro-environment message, you think you're being so with it. That's when you really have to be aware of that corporate stamp of approval, because they'll only let you go so far. They are never going to take it to the level that would threaten their bottom line. So that's when it's the most insidious, when they're preying on your progressive sentiments in order to promulgate their corporate message. They've got us on a leash, and sometimes it feels like we're running free. But believe me, they are not going to let us reach the point where we begin to actually question the fundamentals. That's when they'll rein us in. That's what I was really trying to get at yesterday. So, go to your anti-corporate media, please. Go to your independent films. Plenty of great sources for news and analysis online. Just go non-corporate, anti-corporate. I mentioned ProPublica yesterday. I love Jacobin. I'm on the Jacobin site almost every day. Democracy Now!, which we mention almost every day on this program. There's plenty out there. You have to escape the corporate gatekeepers. So this all started with this Peanuts panel. Of course, the artist Charles Schulz. The character Linus. And Linus is saying to his classmate, no one is going to give you the education you need to overthrow them. Well, I needed to go back and check the quote. And as I've told you, it's Assata Shakur. First of all, let me give you a little more of the quote. No one's going to give you the education you need to overthrow them. Nobody is going to teach you your true history, teach you your true heroes, if they know that knowledge will help set you free. From the autobiography of Black liberation activist Assata Shakur. So as I said, this took me down a couple of rabbit holes. I got this from a quote site, Goodreads. There are several sites for quotes out there. So it took me to other quotes by Assata Shakur. And I found some of them very interesting. Let me just read a few to you. People get used to anything. The less you think about your oppression, the more your tolerance for it grows. After a while, people just think oppression is the normal state of things. But to become free, you have to be acutely aware of being a slave. Again, from her autobiography. Here's another one from the same publication. Nobody in the world, nobody in history has ever gotten their freedom by appealing to the moral sense of the people who were oppressing them. Yeah, these are excellent reminders. These quotes are especially potent in the context of her work as a Black liberation activist. But these ideas transcend into the oppression of capitalism. I totally relate to these sentiments. If you think you're free, if you think you live in a democracy, you have little to no choices in your work life. There's no democracy at work. You have to work in order to live. Not working is punishable by death, by starvation. And we don't have democracy at work, and some people say, well, that's, they've just accepted that. Well, we don't have democracy in government either. So this authoritarian, oligarchic, capitalist world we live in is certainly a system of oppression. And nobody in the world, nobody in history has ever gotten their freedom by appealing to the moral senses of the people who were oppressing them. Assata Shakur. And I'll close with this lengthy quote. This is the 21st century, and we need to redefine revolution. This planet needs a people's revolution, a humanist revolution. Revolution is not about bloodshed or about getting to the mountains and fighting. We will fight if we are forced to, but the fundamental goal of revolution must be peace. We need a revolution of the mind. We need a revolution of the heart. We need a revolution of the spirit. The power of the people is stronger than any weapon. A people's revolution can't be stopped. We need to be weapons of mass construction, weapons of mass love. It's not enough just to change the system. We need to change ourselves. We have got to make this world user-friendly. User-friendly. Are you ready to sacrifice to end world hunger? To sacrifice to end colonialism? To end neocolonialism? To end racism? To end sexism? Revolution means the end of exploitation. Revolution means respecting people from other cultures. Revolution is creative. Revolution means treating your mate as a friend and an equal. Revolution is sexy. Revolution means respecting and learning from your children. Revolution is beautiful. Revolution means protecting the people, the plants, the animals, the air, the water. Revolution means saving this planet. Revolution is love. Assata Shakur. I like that because she has the bona fides as a lifelong revolutionary and activist to talk about and to incorporate love and personal relationships. The kind of language she uses, I wholeheartedly accept from her because she's walked the walk and she's talked the talk about real revolution, about the relationship between the oppressor and the oppressed. When people go straight to the love and squishy stuff without acknowledging the hard reality, the hard truth of oppressive relationships, without having walked the walk and talked the talk, and believe me, Assata Shakur has. And that's one of the rabbit holes I went down this morning because I wasn't familiar with her. I should have been. I'm ashamed that I wasn't. Certainly those in the Black liberation community, in the rap and hip-hop world, I mean, she's huge in the culture. And here I am, this small-town white kid who learned about Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, and that pretty much ended it. I should have known about Assata Shakur. You should know about Assata Shakur. Active in the early mid-'60s with the Black Panther Party and the Black Liberation Army. A contemporary of Angela Davis. I'm kind of ashamed that this is a new person to me. So Assata Shakur was part of this whole debate in the 60s, and she was arrested several times, and she was hounded, and she was framed, and she was eventually arrested for murder, served time, escaped, and for the last, how long? Close to 50 years. Long time now. She's been living in asylum in Cuba. And she's written books, and she's written an autobiography from which I quoted, and just a fascinating, important life. And as someone who's just now learning about her, I'm not going to pretend to know anything about all these. I mean, she was, at dozens of different trials and arrested all these different times and convicted once or twice. And I'm not going to offer any opinions on the details because I don't know. But Shakur, 1984. Granted political asylum in Cuba, has been there ever since. A handful of books and several articles, and as I say, white guy talking here, I'm just looking at her Wikipedia page, and under the cultural influence category, there's a dozen or more different references to people who have honored her in the culture. As I alluded to a minute ago, rappers from Common to Public Enemy, Jay-Z, others. Yeah, she's been lauded in song and story. So she herself is a perfect example of the very quote that started this whole conversation. Nobody's going to give you the education you need to overthrow them. And my own extrapolation of that, no media, no movie, television show, website is going to give you the information you need to overthrow them. So she's a perfect example of that very idea. The fact that I didn't know Assata Shakur. How did I not know this woman? Anyway, I mentioned a couple of rabbit holes I went down. I want to mention this too. Okay, this all started with the Peanuts panel. Charles Schulz, Peanuts, good old Charlie Brown, you know, that cast of characters. Well, I was curious because they fooled me. The panel itself looks like an original panel. Now, the drawing, of course, is the original drawing. They just copied that. But what had me a little bit confused is I thought to myself, well, did Charles Schulz actually quote Assata Shakur? Because I looked to the printing in the dialogue bubble, and it looks just like Charles Schulz's printing. I'm a bit of a Charles Schulz expert, if I do say so. I became a huge fan of Peanuts when I was a little kid, and I would save my paper route money, and I would buy every book that came out. In those days, every 6 months or every year or so, they would put out a collection of the most recent newspaper strips. So it'd be a little paperback book. And it would cost 50 cents, 75 cents back in those days. And I had this collection. I had at least 100 of them. As each one came out, I would buy it. And I loved Charles Schulz. He was my hero. So I'm looking at this thing, and that's his writing. That's the way he printed. But then I examined it more closely, and I realized, oh man, they did a really good job on this. I look at the R in overthrow, and there's 2 R's. By God, they're exactly the same. This is not hand printed. This is a font. So I look at the other letters. I look at the G in going and the G in give, and they are absolutely identical. I went so far as to, because I'm a little obsessive, I do this kind of thing. I went so far as to actually put the picture in my little paint program, enlarge it, and I made a copy, and then I overlay one letter over the other letter to confirm that they are absolutely identical. So this is a font that's been typed. And it looks really, really good. It looks just like Charles Schulz's, his hand lettering, which is an important part of cartooning. So, yeah, for a while there, they had me fooled. I thought, well, Charles Schulz must have quoted Assata Shakur, which I could see because some people don't know this. Some do, but some don't. Charles Schulz was a badass. He was very intelligent. And the Linus character especially, as well as the Charlie Brown character, but the strip generally was highly philosophical. It was often kind of dark. It was often kind of weird and absurd. If you have an idea in your head that the Peanuts characters were nothing more than the holiday specials or all the merchandising that came out, the soft, Snoopy, huggable dolls, and doing a strip every single day, 5 days a week for 50 years, however long he did it. Every one of them wasn't a gem. Every one of them didn't hit the pinnacle of philosophical meanderings. Of course not. You can't keep up that kind of pace 5 times a week for 50 years. So yeah, a lot of it was just dumb or silly, or he missed the mark. Of course, that's going to happen. But if you don't understand what Peanuts was really about and what Charles Schulz was really about, then I highly encourage you to go back and do some reading. The guy was good, and he wasn't afraid at all of some subversive thought. He entertained lots of subversive thought. And King Features, I think, was his syndicate. I'm sure it got past those guys. I'm sure it went way over their heads. So I tell you all this because I'm thinking, well, it's possible. He could have quoted Assata Shakur. But then I thought again, he wouldn't do that without giving her credit. He wouldn't just steal somebody's quote and write it as his own. So that put me then down the path of finding out for sure, just confirming that, yeah, this is not an original. And the rabbit hole that I followed here was the whole idea of using Peanuts, and they're not the only ones. Certainly, it happens all over the place. Einstein gets quoted all the time with quotes that aren't his. But it always kind of especially pissed me off that they used Peanuts, which was a great cultural artistic pillar in American literature. I don't think I'm overstating things. Charles Schulz has a very special place. And it always pissed me off when people used his characters and put their own words in those characters' mouths. Now, this particular Assata Shakur quote, "No one is going to give you the education you need to overthrow them," it's kind of beautiful and appropriate, and it's within the sentiment and within the ethos of Charles Schulz and Peanuts. So I kind of like this one, I have to confess. But generally the idea that people appropriate established characters, I just don't like it. Now, I don't think it should necessarily be illegal. There is such thing as fan fiction, and there's that kind of appropriation as a free speech guy. I understand that. But as an artist, I think you should hold yourself to a higher standard. I don't think you should steal someone else's art or images and pass them off as your own. So, rabbit hole number 2 or 3 here that I found just fascinating. So I'm looking up all these different examples of people putting their own words in the mouths of Peanuts characters, and it's all over the place. And I came across something called Peanut Tweeter by a guy named Jason Agnello. And he did this exact thing. He would take a panel, a single panel, and then he would replace the dialogue bubble with a quote from Twitter, which would be appropriate to the scene. And it's always kind of in a single panel form, and it's kind of absurd and kind of funny. Like, for example, the iconic look when they're sort of leaning on the stone wall. If you're a Peanuts fan at all, you recognize this. They're just kind of standing there leaning on the wall and thinking. It's this one happens to be Lucy and Charlie Brown. And Lucy says, "If computers use all the information on the internet to reach sentience, Skynet is going to be a f***ing moron." Okay. So it's pretty good. They're pretty funny. And put in the mouths of these characters is kind of impactful. Another one, Charlie Brown's little sister, what was her name? Sally, I think, right? Sitting at her school desk looking at a piece of paper. And she says, "Only in math problems can you buy 60 cantaloupes and no one asks what the hell is wrong with you." Okay, so these go on and on. There are dozens and dozens and hundreds. I don't know how many of these things he did. Again, the artist or the writer is Jason Agnello. And it's interesting how he does this because he leaves Schultz's signature within the panel. But just outside the panel, he credits the tweeter. So, for example, the first one I read about computers, just outside the panel, it's at Mike Drucker. The second one is at Karimi. So he credits the tweet that he uses. And then on the right side of the panel, just outside, he acknowledges peanuttweeter.com. He acknowledges his own outfit. Okay, he's a stand-up guy. He's giving credit to the tweeter. He's not stealing it. He's putting his own name on it, acknowledging the fact that this is his. It's not an original Charles Schulz quote, but he's leaving Schultz's signature on the drawing. So I have respect for this guy. But I should very quickly add here that, I don't know, I have mixed feelings. This is appropriating somebody else's work. Well, the company that owned the rights to Peanuts back in, this was 10 years ago now, back in 2011, they had a little cease and desist thing. They said, you can't do this. And they won. They took him down. Peanut Tweeter ceased to exist in 2011. But only after creating hundreds of these things, which you can still find online and you still find in social media all the time. People putting words into the mouths of Peanuts characters. Now, the problem is people share these panels, and this is people just generally out in the webosphere. They share these panels and they don't include the peanuttweeter.com credit. They don't include the original tweeter. It's just the panel itself with Schultz's signature. And as I mentioned earlier, this font that looks amazingly like actual hand-lettered Schultz lettering. And now I have a problem. And now you really are doing something harmful to the culture. You really don't have any right. You don't have a moral right. You don't have a legal right to steal the work of an artist and pass it off as your own. When he was labeling it as an appropriation, as a kind of fan fiction or, whatever he's doing there, I could kind of be, okay. But when it goes beyond that, and he should have anticipated this, when it's shared with no credits, and now you're just creating confusion in the world. Did Charles Schulz actually write this one? Or did he not? I'm just talking strictly on a moral, ethical level. Just respect for the art, respect for the artist. I don't think you should do it. I don't think you should. And it kind of pisses me off. Now, there are often times when it's really obvious. The perfect example, of course, being the iconic scene, I'm sure you've seen it, where it's Charlie Brown and Snoopy sitting on the edge of a dock, looking out over this sort of bucolic scene of a lake and a horizon. And sometimes there's a sunset, depending on what the appropriator has decided to do with it. Or sometimes it's the night sky. But you see the back, just the backs of the characters as they're contemplating. And so then the whole point of the meme is to have some sort of inspirational life quote. And they're often really hacky and really dumb. And they're things that Charles Schulz was just way too cool for. He would never put these insipid words into the mouths of his characters. Oh, here's one of my favorites, meaning one of my least favorites. Charlie Brown says, "Someday we will all die, Snoopy." Snoopy says, "True, but on all the other days, we will not." It's just sentimental, hacky, not funny, not smart. It's just, and to put those stupid words into the mouths of iconic characters just pisses me off. Don't do it. It shows a complete lack of respect for an important artist. Charles Schulz was a major figure in American art and literature. Oh, by the way, a little detail here that, again, totally pisses me off. In these little scenes with Charlie Brown and Snoopy, they'll have Snoopy talking. Snoopy never spoke. His dialogue balloon was always a thought bubble. It was the little circles that make it a thought bubble rather than a dialogue bubble. So that little detail pisses me off. So there you go. I thought I'd share my rabbit holes today. And I give you your assignment. If you're not familiar with Assata Shakur, I'm going to spend the rest of today, I think, reading about her and reading her words. She sounds like an amazing person. And the chances are pretty good that you're laughing at me right now. You didn't know Assata Shakur? No, I didn't. I'm confessing. And if you're not really down with Peanuts and you think they're just sort of goofy, funny, light humor, no. Go back and find the philosophy, the deep, sometimes brooding, existential philosophy of Charles Schulz as portrayed in the Peanuts characters. All right. I love you. I'm Charles Purcell.